So it's early in the morning here in Pembrokeshire. Well, not that early, it's a Sunday, and but it's early enough to have some mist on the estuary. Just how pretty is that? So lovely. So I'm here, got the dogs with me. There's Zorro, say hi Zorro, and Tika, yay, and Mango, and more importantly, actually they'd probably dispute that, but I also have this, and oh, it's not in focus. See if we get that in focus in a minute. Let's swing it round into the light, and there we go, that's better. So early morning light on a Trezor 17 jewel watch, made almost certainly in the late 50s, early 60s, I would say, in Switzerland, before the great calamity of the Quartz emergence. And in this video I'm going to use this watch to show you my basic workflow for doing a standard service on a watch. And stop the intro right there, or at least pause it, because having shot that intro, I decided to use this watch, which is a very simple watch without any complications, to help us brush up on our terminology, on the correct names for the different parts of the watch. And for that reason, I have called this video the mechanical watch, the naming of the parts. Okay, so the purpose of this video then is just to brush up on our terminology when we're referring to the different parts of the watch, and that's why we're calling it the naming of the parts. So, right then, let's deal with the real basics first. So, I guess everyone knows this. This, right, is the strap. Okay, this is a leather strap. If it is metal, let me just grab one here. This is not a strap. This is a bracelet. Okay, so that's the difference there. This is the buckle. Okay, and just go back to the bracelet. This doesn't have a buckle. It has one of these. Let's get that to focus. This is a King Seiko one, and this is called a deployment clasp. Okay, so bracelet with deployment clasp and strap. Get that to focus. Strap with buckle. Okay, so then the strap is attached to the lugs. These are lugs here and here, with a thing called a spring bar. Let me just see if I've got one of those hanging around here, and I have, like white plastic tweezers. Just bring this in, and there is a spring bar. Okay, this one is too big for this watch, but this is what you use, generally speaking, although not always, to attach the bracelet or the strap to the watch, and it attaches normally to these, which are the lugs. Okay, so when we look through the glass, that will be referred to either as the glass or quite often the crystal, and it can be made out of hardened glass, mineral glass, crystal, or in this case acrylic. Okay, if there is a piece of metal or a retaining component around the glass, that is frequently referred to as the bezel, although in this case there isn't a bezel because it runs straight into the case. Okay, so the case is formed of the case, this part, the main body, the lugs, that's all part of the case, and the case back. And in this case, if you'll excuse the pun, this is a snap-off back. Now we wind the watch with this disc here, cylindrical disc with the serrated edge, and that is called the crown. Okay, and the crown is attached to, just pull it out, there you go, and you can just see the top of it there, the stem, and the stem runs inside the movement into what are called the keyless works. Okay, so we're nearly done on the outside of the watch now. These are, much of everyone knows this, the hands, and the face of the watch. We don't call it a face. It's called the dial. Okay, and so the these indices here are Roman. Okay, these are Roman numerals. If you see Arabic, that's then just normal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in Arabic numerals, because of course it was the ancient Arabic nations that gave us the gift of, those numbers. And if you'd been an accountant before that time, your job would have been pretty hideous, working out your accounts with Roman numerals, if you'd never stopped to think about that. Okay, so the only other thing that I think is worth mentioning here is what it says on the watch. Quite often you will find the brand name here. This is a brand name called Trezor, and it says it's got 17 jewels. Lots of people ask me what does that mean, and when we get inside the watch in a moment, I will let you know that. And Inca block here. Inca block is a technology that evolved, I think it was in the 60s, maybe late 50s, where it really came to prominence, where we incorporate a degree of shock absorption for the balance staff. Now, you don't necessarily know what a balance staff is yet, but when we get inside the watch, I am going to explain that. So, quick bit of revision here on the outside of the watch. We have a strap with a buckle, but you could have a bracelet with a deployment clasp. We have lugs, okay? We have a crown, which is affixed to the stem, which moves into the keyless works, which we use to change the hands of the watch, which show us the time against the indices, which can either normally be in Roman or in Arabic, but sometimes they're just markers as well, or even, get yourself a nice Rolex, you might find that they're diamonds or something like that. And that's about it for the outside of the watch. So I'm going to open up the watch now and go into some detail on the terminology of the components that we find inside the watch. Okay, so for those of you who are still with me on this and are particularly observant, you will have noticed that this is not the same watch, but I wanted to bring it out just to show you, that what we are talking about here really is the basic makeup of a mechanical watch, because the watch that you can see here is a Elgin pocket watch that was made at the turn of the last century. So we're looking at about sort of 1890, 1900s. So we got a full 6.5 decades pass before we get to this watch, okay, which is the one that we were looking at a moment ago. And interestingly, if you look at the two designs here, you're going to see the huge amount of similarity. This is one of the beautiful things about being a watchmaker working with mechanical watches, because these are skills that are applicable. It doesn't change on you all the time, and a lot of watches that are being made today still follow these basic principles. And in fact, if we look at the pocket watch for a moment, and I'm just going to sort of skip ahead slightly and talk about this component, which is known as the balance. I'll just give it a tiny little move there. Okay. You'll see that there are screws on the balance there, and that is so that the watchmaker can tune the balance for different positions, which makes the watch more accurate, because of course the watch is going to be not in one static position all the time as it's carried around. And of course on this watch, although the balance is moving, it doesn't have that facility. So in some ways you could argue that the 1890s watch that you can see there is more sophisticated than the 1960s watch. It's certainly a lot better looking inside, that I'm holding on the right. But the real point of this is to bring out the similarities that are here. Anyway, we're going to use the watch on the right, so I'll pop that down here and just get it looking nice in the light there. We're going to focus in on that in a minute. Oh, this one does work actually. Let me just to show you this, because this is really lovely. Let's put a little bit of power on this watch, and give it a shake, and off she goes. So 1890, really very nice. Anyway, so just going back to our basic 1960s watch, and we're going to just come in a little bit closer, and I will point out the major parts on this side of the watch. Okay, so with the watch up nice and close, we can go through the basic parts on this side of the watch. So let's deal first with the component that is spinning around there. Now that is known as the balance, and as you can see, it is essentially a wheel that has a spring attached to it, and you can just see the spring there moving in and out. That is known either as the balance spring, which tends to be the US nomenclature from the United States. In the UK we refer to it as the hairspring quite often. We can see now one of the jewels, and I mentioned when we were looking at the outside of the watch that I would talk about the jewels. Now the jewels exist to reduce the effects of friction, and here we have a manufactured ruby, and this is actually a capstone on the top of the other thing which I talked about, which was the Inca block mechanism. And there is a number of components in here which shift around a little bit, so if the watch is knocked, it doesn't transfer the energy directly to the top of the balance staff. Now there is a staff, and I'll show you this later when we dismantle the watch, but there is a staff about which this wheel, which is the balance, revolves. And when we take the watch apart, I'll show you that. But that is one of the jewels. We have other jewels in here. Here's a jewel, here's a jewel, here's a jewel, and here's a jewel. Now bearing in mind they are all at just one end of a wheel, you know, immediately we will have 8 jewels, because there's 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, 2 here. We've actually got 2 jewels inside here, and we've got 2 jewels at the other side, and on the pallet fork there are jewels as well, and that would account then, if my arithmetic's right, for the 17 jewels that are inside this watch. So all of this here with the pallet fork, which I will show you later, you can just see in the background a little, it's quite dark, but there's a little rectangle you can see moving back and forwards, and that is one of the pallet fork jewels. And that, all of that assembly there makes up what we call the escapement. And it's called the escapement because it is the way we allow, under regulation, the potential energy that's stored inside the spring here to escape. Okay. Now, some other things to point out here. As I mentioned before, here we have the crown and the stem. The stem is kept in place by this screw here, and this is called the setting lever screw. Okay, and all of this component here is this big chunk of metal here. Actually, it's not that big. If I stick my finger in there, you'll see just how big it is. You know, when you're watchmaking, none of it's very big, but in relative terms, you know, this is a big component, and this is called the barrel bridge. And it's the barrel bridge because it holds in place the barrel, and we'll see that later, in which the spring resides. Okay, so we've got the stem coming in here. Underneath here, and on the other side of the watch, we'll show you these, we have what's called the keyless works. And here we have the crown wheel. Okay, one point to bear in mind as a watchmaker, quite often the thread on the screw that retains the crown wheel is in a different direction than all the other screws. And you need to bear that in mind. Sometimes you will see the screw here with actually 3 lines on it. You've got 2 parallel lines either side of the main screw indentation there, and that is to remind you that when you remove it in the opposite direction to the other screws. If you get that wrong, of course, you start to try and put too much effort on it, and these components are quite small, so you can strip it out, which is a bit of a major problem. So this is the crown wheel, and it is attached to the ratchet wheel. This is the ratchet wheel because it's got a ratchet on it in the form of a click. Now this, you just see these 2 little pillars here. They're attached to a moving part here, which will only allow the ratchet to turn in one direction, and that is called the click because it makes a clicking noise. And the click has a spring, and that is referred to as the click spring. Okay, so that is the barrel bridge with the crown wheel and the ratchet wheel. If we come over here, we have another bridge, and this bridge is known as the train bridge, and that's because it provisions a place for the wheels of the train to do their operations. And you can see, you know, we've got the second wheel here, the third wheel here, the fourth wheel here in these jewels, which are manufactured rubies, and the escape wheel here. Okay, in some watches you will see individual bridges for all of these different wheels, typically on the older pocket watches, and even in some good quality things like the Perrett Grand Prix 1960s watch, they would have individual ones for each one of these, but in this case we've got a bridge for all of them. Okay, below here you can't actually see it, but we also have a little bridge for the pallet fork, and that's known as the pallet bridge. Okay, so now turning to the balance, that doesn't have a bridge because, you know, the component that's keeping it in place comes out from the main plate, but doesn't go anywhere other than the balance. Okay, so in this case, that's known as a pallet cock. In something like a Rolex 3035, you'll find that there is actually a balance bridge, and on some of the Seikos, Pogue and stuff like that, you have balance bridges. So, but in this case, it's a balance cock. So I think the only other things of note here are the movement retaining screw and in this case washer as well. Now when you see them like this is reminiscent again of how a pocket watch works, and what's happening here is these screws are pulling the movement up, okay, which means that the movement will never come out, not in this direction, from this component here. So this component is going to come off as well, and the movement is going to come out forwards from this component, and these are helping to keep it firm by pulling the movement into this component around the outside, which is in turn held firmly in the case. So that's the mechanism there. So yeah, quite a lot covered there. What we're going to do now is take the movement out, take the dial off, and look at the keyless works. What I'll do then is I'm going to service the watch anyway. Once I've got it all apart, I will just recap with all the parts as they are laid out on the bench, and I think that will be enough for this particular naming of the parts. So let's get on with that. Okay, so we have taken the movement out of the case now, and before taking the dial off and showing you the keyless works on the front side of the movement, I just wanted to show you this screw here, because this is one of two, sometimes there are three dial feet screws. So it's normally coming in perpendicularly into the side of the movement like that, and you have to loosen that to release the dial, making sure of course that you've taken the hands off first. Okay, so that is the dial feet screw. Okay, so we have the dial off now and are in a position to see the parts on the front of the movement. And so this sort of what at first glance looks like a sort of jumble of different levers. This is known as the keyless works. It's known as the keyless works because we use it to both set the time and wind the watch. And actually, if I operate that now, if I were to pull it out, you can see that we can now move the hands. But if I push it in, what we can actually do is wind the watch. Okay, so that used to be achieved in the days of a pocket watch by means of a key. So as watches evolved, they got to a point where they didn't need the key anymore, and the mechanism that dispensed with the need for the key is this mechanism here, and that's why it's called the keyless works. Makes sense, really, although it's not often that you refer to something because of the absence of something. You normally refer to it because of the presence of something, like, you know, the engine block or the exhaust manifold. But no, this is here because of the absence of a key, and hence the keyless works. Okay, a few more things in here. This sort of brass coloured metal disc here is the bottom of the barrel, okay, and that's where the mainspring is held. On the top here, this little flimsy washer, that's known as the dial washer, and the wheel underneath it is the hour wheel. This wheel here is the minute wheel, okay? And here you can see the jewel, which is at the bottom of the balance, okay? So it's the second Inca block jewel, and there are actually two jewels there. There's one inside, and there is the capstone here. Okay, so a little bit more simple than the other side of the watch, but nevertheless some important components here. What I'm going to do now is strip the watch completely down for its service, and then lay out all the parts, and I will go through any parts that we've not already mentioned, and do a little bit of revision on the parts that we have mentioned. So let's do that. Oops. I'm just dropping my pointer here. Okay. So, just thought I'd stop at this point actually, because it's an excellent point to show you the basic layout of the train. Let's just see if I can come in here a little bit closer. That's good. So, you can see I have taken out the barrel with the mainspring here. And then we have the wheels, the tops of which we saw the jewels for in the train bridge. And here we have the second wheel, the third wheel, the fourth wheel, and the escape wheel, which forms part of the escapement here with the pallet fork here. And this is actually, I said it was a pallet bridge, but it isn't. Looking at it, it's a pallet cock. Okay, so yeah, so that is the basic layout of the train. So, really, really important. Most mechanical watches, pretty much all mechanical watches, work in this fashion, that we've got stored energy here, which is transmitted through the powertrain and then escaped via the escape wheel through the pallet fork on to the balance here. So I mentioned the number of jewels, and you can see that there also are a couple of jewels at either end of the staff for the pallet fork here. And also on the balance itself, there's a thing called an impulse jewel, and I'll cover that when we look at that in some detail in a moment. But just thought it was a useful point to stop to point out this vital part of the anatomy of the basic wristwatch. Okay, as it starts to rain here quite heavily against the window, I don't know whether you can hear that, here is, or rather here are, all the parts of this simple watch movement. In fact, watch components, not just the movement, laid out, and most of these components have just been through the ultrasonic cleaner. So some of this that I'm going to go through now is revision on what I was just explaining earlier on, and some of these parts you've not seen. So just stick with me for another 2 or 3 minutes, and it's really starting to rain now. Oh, okay. So let's go through it. Okay, here we have the main part of the case. The crystal is, or the glass is not here. It's all scratched up, and I've actually chucked it and ordered a new one. There is a spacer for the movement, and there is the movement component against which the movement is pulled tight using the movement screws, which I'll show you in a moment. And here is the case back, which is stainless steel. Okay. And here we come then, just get that to focus, to the main plate. Just the light on that isn't all that clear. Just see if we can get a little better, see what's going on there. So that's better. There's the main plate with its retaining screws at the bottom there. And then next to that we have the barrel bridge with its 2 retaining screws, and the train bridge, and then the dial and the minute wheel, the dial washer, and at the top the hour wheel. Okay, and then coming down here we have the ratchet wheel. It's actually looking a little bit grubby, so I'm going to give that an extra clean in a minute. The ratchet wheel and its screw, and the crown wheel below that and its screw, remembering that the crown wheel screw thread is in the opposite direction. Then we have the thing that powers it all, the mainspring. The attachment in the middle of the mainspring about which it swivels is called the spring arbor, and then we have the barrel itself. The components below that you can see there with a little spring, that is the click and the click spring, and that sort of brass disc there with the hole in it, that is the top of the mainspring barrel. Then we have the train, we have the second wheel, and the cannon pinion, which fits on to the stem of the second wheel. Then we've got the third wheel, the fourth wheel, the escape wheel, and then we come through to the escapement itself, which is the escape wheel
the pallet forks. You can see the two jewels there, and the pallet cock, and the screw that keeps that in place. And then you can see we have the balance cock, the balance itself, and the screw that retains that into the movement. And also I've taken out the Inca block, which I talked about. So you can see they're actually there is the cap jewel there, and then in the bit that shifts around that does the shock resistant, that little steel container on the other side of that, there is the other jewel where the pivot fits in. So that set of components are very, very important. That is the main powertrain in the escapement. And then down here onto the keyless works, okay, I explained these a moment ago, but this is, you know, the stem, and basically the setting lever there and the setting screw. These are the levers help you alternate between the setting function and the winding function. Then we've got the stem and the two parts there that fit onto the stem and control the winding of the watch and the setting. Those are the actual components that sort of do the work there. And then lastly, but certainly not least, without these, all of the rest would be not much use. The hands that actually tell the time against the indices on the dial. Okay, so that is it. There are all the parts of the watch. I hope this video has been really, really useful. I've enjoyed making it as always. If you like my videos, then please subscribe. I'm trying to get to as many subscribers as possible. I'm making videos without getting my finger in the way quite a lot, as you just saw there. And yeah, some of my videos are reasonably technical, but others are on the, you know, the whole watch industry and watches of fashion items and stuff like that. So I'm hoping there's something for everyone in my videos. And yeah, so if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of the same, then please subscribe. But that's all from me this evening, and I will check out for now there. Cheerio.